Melody Lauer here from Citizens Defense Research. You are listening to part 2 of our conversation between Ross and myself on consent. If you're interested in listening to part 1 of this discussion, you will find the link down below or probably somewhere up here. So without further ado, let's get right into part 2 discussion about consent.
I guess my next question would be, if you have either a male or a female who has been in a situation that they're not sure. You gave the example of you went to a party, you were kind of like, oh, and maybe you didn't, maybe you knew exactly what the party was, maybe you didn't know exactly what the party was. Once you got there, you're like, the vibe's pretty good, I'm gonna stay. And then something happened, then the next thing happened, and before you know it, things have happened. And afterwards, you were like, I don't feel great about this. I don't know if this was something I wanted or if this was something I didn't. If someone came to you and asked those questions, how would you start that process without leading them either one way or the other? Like, yes, you were violated, or no, you weren't, because you wouldn't want to make that decision for them, I would assume, right?
And so I'm going to answer this carefully because there's two hats I wear, which is the law enforcement hat is by the time they're coming to me normally it's to report a crime, and so we take it seriously and we don't try to talk them any particular direction. We just listen and try to figure out what happened. But on a personal side, if I had a friend, knowing what I know and have seen, if I had someone approach me and say those words, and having seen a lot of those cases where someone went to older sister's friend's party and then ended up in a bed with a dude who was a little older and had things happen that weren't comfortable. And then, very rare to report right away. Almost always there's going to be exactly what you're talking about, which is that going home and what was that? Like, did I give off signals? Did I not? Did I like it? Did I not? And it largely comes down to figuring out what that person is feeling, because and helping them get through that, because what I mean is there are people who will come away from that situation and be perfectly healthy for the rest of their lives going, well, that wasn't fun, but guess that's out of the way now. Now I should probably think about trying to figure out how to make that more pleasant next time and get what I want out of it, and et cetera, et cetera. There are people like that out there. I grew up with a girl like that who had basically lost her virginity at a high school part or a college party freshman year, came back and just told everybody about it and was like, yeah, I don't know, I was unconscious. I mean, I sort of remember the dudes kind of coming in and out, woke up, lost my virginity, wasn't good, didn't like it, but I was like, well, it happened. I put myself here. I got really drunk. I started making out with the dude, and yeah, it would have been nice if he stopped. And you put that in, now granted, that's 20 years ago or 23 years ago. It, if you put that in modern context, though, that's abhorrent. We'd be like, oh my, we have to get that person to a rape counselor immediately. And okay, maybe that person doesn't want to see what happened to them as rape, and that's something worth pursuing. But then we get into some really complicated territory where, again, there are people out there who are going to live perfectly normal, happy lives, sex lives, and otherwise, having had that happen to them. And so jumping to that conclusion can also be a little bit dangerous, just from a cultural standpoint of, this is what I'm applying my values to this person
Yeah.
and cultural values to this person that may be detrimental to them in the end, right? Because if we beat it to death and say you were raped, you were raped, you were raped,
Yeah.
that's not always a positive thing, right? We
Well,
say that a lot like it is, but if that person doesn't identify as that, then we could be doing damage doing that, right? It's a
in some
weird thing to
way,
think about, but
yeah, because in some way we're almost gaslighting them, right?
yeah.
In a sort of weird kind of reverse way. Like, they're saying, yeah, I had this experience, but I'm not feeling that this was a crime committed against me. I was a participant. I'm taking responsibility for my part in this.
Right.
Now, do I think that there are times that people have been manipulated when they absolutely have been, and
Oh,
they're
sure.
yes, and so I want to be I too want to be very, very careful
Right.
that there are definitely people who have been manipulated into believing that they are not victims, but they absolutely are, and they
Yep.
have been predated upon, especially in those circumstances, like the age disparity, the power disparity, all of those kinds of things.
Yep.
So but at the
It
same
gets
time,
tricky.
yeah, it gets extremely tricky, because in some areas, absolutely, we need to make sure that the people who are preying on people are stopped as soon as we can stop them. And that means
Mhm.
identifying victims and getting their stories out there and believing them, while also being respectful of the people who are like, yeah, no, that, it was a bad decision. Because I'm a firm believer that regret does not equal rape. If I
Right.
willingly, consensually sleep with someone, and I, fully conscious, fully sober, all those things of the correct age, and I wake up the next day and I'm like, oh, that was a mistake. That does not mean that I was raped. And I know
Right.
that there has actually been a trend towards like, hey, if you wake up the next day and you didn't like it, you were raped. And I don't agree with that,
Right.
for multiple different reasons. That being said, if I can identify ways in which I was taken advantage of, like, man, and I'm using me as an example, anybody, that becomes a really tricky area of at what point do I feel like an actual crime has been committed or not? And I guess in your line of work, people get really good at skating that line so that they don't get caught.
Oh, yeah.
And like I said, I don't envy anybody in the position, either on the law enforcement side, the court side, the mental health professional side. I mean, or
And
even the people
family
involved.
members.
Yeah,
Yeah.
family members or boy girl, boy girl girl. It doesn't matter. I mean, being accused and being innocent has got to be horrid, absolutely horrid. Being
Yep.
being a victim is horrid. I mean, all of it is just horrid.
Yep.
And that's why if you get the consent right, if you get,
Yeah.
the part of like, hey, make sure that, I mean, we kind of talked about this at one point in time, like, what was it? What was it? I think you said there was like a university that says like you have to get so many yeses or whatever. I'm like, and we talked about it like, you're at a
Yeah.
dance, right? And someone's like, may I put my hand on your waist? Yes. May I touch your hand?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
the
Yeah.
obsessiveness with which you have to get the yeses can then turn into just like, oh, just like no, because
Yeah.
it's so taxing. It is taxing on you because we communicate nonverbally so much that
Yes.
if you can't pick up on my nonverbal cues, my implied consent, but
There's
we've
nothing
come to the
there.
but now we've come to the point where we've almost forced it, where now
Well,
I can't give you the body language. I can't give you the come hithers. I can't. It has to
right.
be, I want you to come dance with me. I give you my full consent to put your hand
Right.
around my waist. I give you my full consent to touch my hand. Like, and it
And there's a danger in that.
yeah.
So there's that turns it into transactional, which sex offenders love transactions. Contracts. Oh
That's
yeah. They're great at
interesting.
that. You said
That's
yes,
interesting.
and if you're to a point where like that's all your kid knows, they don't know what they want out of sex, they don't know what they want to feel, they don't know the emotions, the contact, the nonverbal, they have no knowledge of that. Every interaction for them is an end user legal agreement. Click yes, yep, 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 get to the thing. There's a danger
And
in
then
that,
if
and I
they
have
try
no
to pull it
studies to back
back,
that up,
it
but
can be used
I don't
against
think we're
them.
doing ourselves any favors. Yeah, teaching kids that it's all transactional and that's what they should expect. That's going to be a
I had
really
not
crappy
thought about
relationship.
that. And you're right. I could definitely see someone trying to use that against. Well, you gave me, like, I got your verbal consent all along here. You can't tell me no now.
Hmm?
And then believing that
Yep.
and just being like, oh, yeah, you're right. I did. I could absolutely see how that could be exploited.
And that's the problem. And so my overall answer to all of this would be refer that person to a mental health professional, because they're going to have to potentially spend a lot of time figuring out what their values even are about that situation, what their feelings are about that situation. And so, you as a third party coming into that and trying to do that for that person, good luck. Most people can't even do it for themselves half the time. On the other side of the coin from that, as you mentioned, is that, predators use that all the time, and they're very aware of these social rules, and they're very aware of discomfort around certain circumstances. They're very, very good at reading people. A lot of times, we laugh at the newspaper article about the idiot who tried to rob the bank and threw his gun over the counter accidentally and things like that. Har, har, har. When it comes down to it, my experience, and granted, I worked with pretty violent people my whole career. Um, they are more sophisticated than most people give them credit for. And they're not always the smartest folks. They're not always, sometimes they make very, very silly, impulsive decisions on a meta level. But at what they're doing, once they find something that works, they can get very, very good at it. And so sex offenders are great at reading people. One of the number one jobs they all have to be employed when they come out and start paying restitution, things like that. And it's hard to get a sex offender a job, and at a place that isn't going to be problematic. And so one of the things we do is call centers. Great resource to get sex offenders jobs, because boy, can they talk and boy, can they manipulate. And so
Interesting.
they're born call center workers. And so, and I don't want to make you think that every call center person you've ever talked to, and now, everybody's got their stories, right? That person was probably just a jerk, but yeah, it's a higher percentage than you would think. And so to that end, the other side of the coin is a common thing that we have to deal with sex offenders in treatment initially, is them saying something like, well, what I did wasn't rape because that person said they loved me.
Yeah.
And that is like sex offender 101. That's basically, we're going to have that conversation at some point in treatment with every single sex offender out there. So, and whether they truly believe that, or whether that's just convenient, or whether they're just saying it, I think it's all over the place. I think all of the above. And I think it's a very comforting idea that two verbally consenting adults are always 100% okay no matter what. But one of the things we have to talk about in treatment a lot is, hey, there are certain situations where if you are eliciting sex from a subordinate at your company, that person is incapable of giving you consent, really, because of the situation. Now, sure, they can say it, and you can have sex and you can get married and whatever else, and say it was two consenting adults. But that question is always there. And again, it's easy to fall on one side or the other and just say, well, if they said yes and they're a conscious adult, okay, who cares? But we deal with it all the time when sex offenders leverage that and say, and they're very good at leveraging those situations and putting themselves into those social contract situations. Experts at it. So whenever you see the news article about the sex offender turning out to be like the principal of the high school, or the coach, or some high level position that had some authority over kids, and that's not by mistake, right? That's by design. They did that. They got to that position because they wanted to have that authority and have that ambiguity and that leverage over people. So it gets
even the way
really
of, like,
complex really fast.
Things like, oh, I'm so glad that you're 18. And so they put like a younger girl into the situation where they're like, well, yeah, it is such a good, like they manipulate people to lie so that they can then be like, oh, she lied about her age. I thought she was 18.
She said it.
And it's a small little thing like that. But that's exactly the kind of things that your seasoned, unfortunately, and I use that word specifically, your seasoned predators are going to do. That, the love bombing, the, like I said, the manipulation, the the subtle separation. So, and I just listed a few. What are some other things that you would say, based upon your experience, are like clear red flags of not necessarily, well, let's go start with like clear red flags that something is just not right with this person and maybe they are manipulating you or predating.
So, and there's a lot of guides to this out there, but I'll give you kind of my version of it just from having to do 10,000 odd hours of interviews with them, um, somewhere north of that. And they are excruciating to have to talk to compared to even other violent criminals, because sex offenders are, they will remember stuff you said 6 years ago and exactly how you phrased it, and use that against you. They are lawyers at heart, and they will absolutely. So one of the warning signs is if someone is getting really transactional about that, and like really trying to like rules lawyer you into something that you are not okay with, but convince you that you were because you said this thing 3 years ago, or you did this thing 6 months ago, or you said you wanted this. That is a big red flag, right? If they're ignoring what is right in front of them with, any sort of manipulation like that, because that's what that is, right? Or attempt. Another one would be, and this is one I've picked up over the years, is in, they're very good at hiding, I should say. So first off, there's no surefire sign that I can give you silver bullet. Again, they're really good at social engineering. They've probably hidden their entire lives up to that point because they haven't gotten caught, even from loved ones, right? So it's tough. But a thing that I have also noticed is a lot of them are, well, frankly, exhibit, psychopathic, sociopathic behavior, right? So they have trouble sometimes, so antisocial behavior, right? They have trouble putting themselves, empathy, putting themselves inside other people's heads. And because of that, they're really good at faking it, right? Excellent at faking it, and playing the game. But a lot of times, if you talk to them enough, something will slip. And what it is most commonly in my experience is a statement that is odd about how the world works or people think. And to give you a solid example, just Google the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. If you've never seen it, it's like the 800, 900 question, whatever. And it's the yes or no questions that you may have taken pre-employment at some point, like, I have never broken the law. Yes or no. I have never done this thing. Yes or no. I think this thing. And specifically, what I want you to do is look up the, there is a measure built into the MMPI for questions on basically antisocial stuff, right? Deviant behavior. And any of those statements, just read them out, right? Any of those statements made to you are a warning sign. So, for example, one of them would be, I wish I could be as happy as other people. I regret a lot of things I've done. I know who's responsible for most of my problems. I like to talk about sex. Not a thing people normally do, right? So it's on there. I'm sure people have been talking about me. Now, none of these are like a sure sign that this person is a sex offender or a psychopath or whatever, but you will start to hear those. And the problem is, we are, as normal adjusted human beings, we are, whether we want to admit it or not, programmed, right? We are built to ignore awkward social behavior. You stand in an elevator next to a stranger in personal space that you didn't want to, and what do? You don't look at them, right? You dehumanize. You look at everything except them. And so we are built to ignore awkwardness and uncomfortable social situations. And so when one of these gets dropped in conversation, and I've heard them, I don't even know, thousands of times talking to folks, and it'll just be some odd thing. Well, you know that women like this thing, and you're like, but your instinct, especially in a non-professional setting where your job is to pull that thread, your instinct, if a coworker does that, or a friend you've known forever and trusted does that, is going to be just to go, well, that was kind of weird. Well, whatever. Maybe I heard it wrong. That's the moment to pull that thread. And I don't mean below, because there's people out there that are going to go full blown, this person's a sex offender predator, I have to get to the bottom of it. No, but one of the most powerful things you can do is go find somebody else, not that person that you trust, and that you, and just mention it. Be like, hey, it's the weirdest damn thing, and it's probably nothing, but here's this thing. And even if that person is a brick wall and they're like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. The act of you saying that matters. And if it's like the third or fourth time that you've had to tell somebody about this, that is hard for your brain to ignore. And it's going to be easier for you on like the second or third or fourth time to be like, why am I having to have all these conversations about this person? And if you're lucky, the person you're talking to will be like, yeah, that's weird, man. Like that's odd. And that's one of the most powerful things you can do, which is why predators try to isolate you and keep you away from other people as well, by the way.
And that's actually really interesting, because I'm now thinking back to all the times when you're right. It's almost like this weird little like, and I don't like the term gut instinct, because a lot of times, but it is what it is. But it's more than a gut check. It's more of like I like the way that you described that, about it being a kind of a nag, or an awkwardness that you want to avoid. That's the signal. You want to avoid it. It's not like you're repulsed by it, which you could be, that you certainly could be repulsed. Like if someone's like, yeah, all women just, whatever, you, if you're informed, might be like, what a dick. And just go like, that was a giant red flag. But maybe it's a little more subtle and you're like, that was odd. I want to change the subject. If that's your feeling, like, I want to change the subject. I'm not comfortable with this conversation. That felt weird. And you want to avoid it. You probably need to talk about it. I like that. I think that's a great little tip to make you kind of sit up and train your gut to be like, hey, I need to listen to this. And I agree. I don't think necessarily that means that person's an offender, because here's the thing, we're all so vast and we're all so different. We probably all have weird little things that we believe that make someone go, that was weird, to some degree. But then once you get talking to people, you're like, oh, the reason this person is that way is because they believe in this particular religion, or they believe, and that's their culture.
They had a bad day. I mean, I've been exhausted and had things have come out of my mouth that I'm like, why did I say that?
They completely misspoke or whatever. And if maybe later on pattern, you get, if you get comfortable to say like, hey, you said this thing, what did you mean by that? And someone's like, oh, that's what you took. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said it that way. But you're right. And there almost seems to be a quality to it too, like almost like an arrogance to it. If someone says it and it's
they'll blame you. Oh, absolutely.
Maybe it's a question.
If you bring it up, they'll blame you.
Yeah, and maybe if it's like a question, like, I don't know, but I think maybe I believe this. And you're like, really? And you have a conversation about it. But if someone's like, yeah, all women are gold diggers or something like that, and you're like, huh? Right. And they say it so confidently that you feel you don't feel like you can counter it, or you can address it. Or if you try, like you said, they blame you, or you're, oh, you just don't know. You don't know what you're talking about. You basically just described Andrew Tate, by the way, which is amazing. But so those are some interesting red flags. Are there any more, or is that pretty much like your top ones?
Oh, there's a ton, but you just mentioned a great one, which is one of the more powerful things you can also do if, and again, this is very contextually based, so I'm not saying do this with everybody because this can lead to some really bad stuff. But if someone says something like that, where it's just that weird statement that your brain is saying, boy, that was weird, ignore it, move on, this is awkward. One of the most powerful things you can do is ask that person, right? And I stole this from a friend who recently was teaching a class on this, and I loved it. It was actually a participant who came up with this, but I will steal it shamelessly. Which is, and the class was by Stephanie Widener, but I won't name the student for obvious reasons. But the statement was to ask that person, what did you mean by that? Or what did you intend with that statement? Or something to that effect that puts it on them to explain it. And that's an important thing that is not, because in modern context, what we tend to do is just express outrage and then that's it. We go, ugh. Like, what's wrong with you? But that doesn't put it back on them, right? There's no answer they have to give other than to go, I was just kidding, or
They don't
something
have
like
to
that,
out
right?
themselves. They don't have to tell on themselves.
But if you pull that thread, and this is something we do professionally, right? When we're dealing with them, if I'm at a halfway house and I have the guy walk up and say, yeah, and I've had literally this, I'll do the nice version, but the guy who went to prison for 17 years for sexually assaulting 2 kids just spontaneously tell me, oh yeah, well, by the way, those kids wanted it because they came in and took their shirts off and this thing happened and whatever, out of the blue. We were talking about nothing to do with it. And I'm like, what? And there was, even for me professionally, because it's, the guy's gone to prison for 17 years. There's part of my brain that goes, yeah, it's not worth it, right? But it's my job. And so I have to say, why did you just bring that up right now? And that's important because there's a reason, right? And it might be nothing, but more commonly it's the thoughts are going in their head and they're thinking about something bad. So pull that thread and put it back on them to explain. And what sex offenders will almost always try to do, in my experience, is put it back on you again, change the subject.
Yeah.
They love doing the, if they're not winning that conversation or there's no answer they're going to give and they realize they're trapped, they will think of something wrong that you did 6 months ago or said, or the time you didn't answer your phone right away. What were you doing that day? And try to change the subject. And it is oftentimes so ridiculous at that point that even almost anyone can step back and go, what? What? We're talking about you, man. So stick to your guns, right? And once you put up that boundary of like, hey, this is not okay, explain yourself, watch what they do. Because if they immediately try to throw it on you and blame you and say, oh, you heard it wrong, or you misunderstood me, or something like that, that is a very, very bad sign, right?
Yeah, that's that attempt to then control the situation, because that's another thing that we've talked about before, that control is a really, really big thing for people who are consent violators. Is they want to be in control of everything. They want you back on your heels. They want you, like you said, they want you taking the blame. They want to turn it around and be like, well, it's your fault for asking the question. And that is, and that's something that my mother taught me a long time ago. And I wish I had learned it more deeply when she told it to me the first time. It was that people who have your best intentions at heart will always strive for clarity. If you feel confused and they're trying to, especially if you're searching for clarity, like what you're saying, like, what did you mean by that? And instead of actually helping clarify the situation, they just make it more confusing by counter blaming or by getting angry or something like that. And if they get really angry and you're like, that's confusing, why did they get so angry to my question? True intent strives for clarity, ill intent strives for confusion. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. We're gonna continue this. We're gonna have a series, another series where we are going to specifically talk about boundaries and basically kind of how to protect yourself. So this whole conversation about consent, I think, is really, really important, and I think it really lays the groundwork for the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is boundaries. So stay tuned.